This is Beyond the Resume, the podcast that brings you the stories, advice, and insights behind some of the most successful people in real estate. Beyond the Resume is brought to you by Jackson Lucas Executive Search, the industry leader in human capital solutions. Here is Chris Papa and Lisa Flicker.
Welcome, Peter DeCorco. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we were just discussing how, we met years ago, just through industry connections. You've always been a very social guy, very helpful. Actually, you've been extremely helpful to me in searches. Never placed you anywhere. I don't think we've ever worked as a client, but you've always been referred people to me. So I appreciate that.
You know, it's funny. So many people have actually said to me, you probably could have had a pretty good career in search. And, there have been times when I've literally, been like, maybe I should give that a shot. But, I have such extraordinary professionals like yourselves in it that, it would just be no contest. I would fail miserably.
Come join us.
Join us. Yeah, join us. We're not
You
competing.
can't beat them. You probably could, but if you can't, just join us.
That's right.
We'll have so much fun together.
Yeah. There may be this little thing about the company that I started that they may not be super psyched to have me do that, but thank you.
No one listens to this podcast. So just do it on the side. They won't know.
Everyone listens to this podcast.
It is big. I mean, it's gotten bigger, but what does that mean?
Well, listen, aside from me, you've had some wonderful people on it.
And including you. So, Peter, it's so interesting to me. I didn't realize you were a math major. I feel like that goes well with real estate. When you were in college at Colgate, were you thinking I'm going to be a real estate professional?
So, Lisa, absolutely not.
Right.
I went to Colgate, and again, love Colgate, love the liberal arts education, but, you sort of are trying to figure out what the applicability, is to sort of that education aside from being, outstanding at cocktail parties. I picked a mathematical economics major because ultimately I wanted to get into business, right? What business was, I had absolutely no idea. I do know that I watched Wall Street as a kid and thought, that sounds pretty good. I can, do that, go to jail a couple of times and then, come back and, be really successful. But that was sort of the concept of what I was thinking when I was sort of trying to figure out what was the most applicable, major to sort of get into business, right? So real estate, wasn't offered at Colgate. It wasn't sort of even on my radar. I got into real estate in a very circuitous way, and it was good fortune that I did because I love it, and it's been an absolute blessing to sort of be in this industry for, almost 30 years now.
You started the same way Lisa did. She was an auditor, and you were an auditor at Arthur Andersen.
Yep.
Maybe people don't know what Arthur Andersen is. And actually it was before, it's actually I got out of, anyways, I graduated high school in 95 when you were there. So, but tell us about.
I spent some time at the Arthur Andersen training camp in, where was it? In Chicago?
St. Charles, Illinois.
Yes, St. Charles, Illinois. We used to always joke that, when you go to sleep, they move the clocks ahead. But
that was it was a great concept, and it was a wonderful way to sort of get indoctrinated into the Arthur Andersen one firm sort of mindset. But it was, they spent a tremendous amount of money, and it really, I thought, was very helpful for me. When I took the job at Arthur Andersen, Arthur Andersen, the Big Six, now the Big Four at the time, had a program, and I think they still do, where they go to liberal arts schools and say, hey, you don't know much about accounting. We can teach you the debits and the credits, but you can speak to people. You can write, you can, sort of handle these kinds of things that we need you to do. We can get you up to speed on everything else. So for me, it was wonderful to sort of understand what my day job was going to be. I very quickly learned, probably on day 2 or day 3, that I was not going to make a very good accountant, but I will tell you that it is some of the best training out there, just in terms of understanding sort of how a company works. You're out there auditing their process and their procedure. You're understanding, how the financial statements work and sort of the flow of revenue and expenses. And so, you really, really do learn how a company functions, through that opportunity. And it was a great training ground for me for that perspective.
I agree with that. I feel like what you learn, you take that to any business, and even probably how you manage your home life. So did you go back to business school after that?
So as a part of my Arthur Andersen experience, again, not having any accounting, they actually send you part-time to go do your master's in accounting. So I was sort of involved in this sort of program at the University of Hartford. I say it really fast, so it sounds like Harvard, but it's University of Hartford. And it's sort of the, master's in professional accounting. I did that part-time, over the course of a year and a half. Ultimately wanted to go to business school at some point and said, if I go to business school, I'm never, ever, ever going to go do it part-time again. And of course, 2 years later, I'm now in New York City and working at AIG. And guess what? I start my business school program at Stern on a part-time basis. So so much for your for great thoughts about that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're not old, right? You're not. I mean, we're similar the same age. I consider myself very young, so we're similar ages. But like, there was a time where like I feel like all the real estate people in real estate either had an accounting background or a legal background, right? There was no training to get into real estate, right? I mean, now we work with Steers program at Georgetown, NYU. There's all these training programs. But back then it was like and I wanted to get in real estate. My uncle was an attorney, and I'm like, do I have to be an attorney to be in real estate? He's like, no. I'm like, well, why is everyone an attorney that's in real estate? And I guess accounting was the same way. You kind of like have some sort of business acumen or whatever that you learn, the way to think about the world. But yeah, a lot of the people that like of a certain generation, they all come out of that type of background. Right? So it feels like accounting or the legal side. And now it's like special training programs. And then
it's interesting. So my partner is a lawyer by training, right? So Eric Hade is one of my dear friends and my partner in my new sort of venture, Brook Farm Group. So he started out as a lawyer. I started out as an accountant, and we kind of worked our way into sort of the real estate business. As you said, sort of it was hard to get, there were no training programs at the essence of real estate. All these companies, even the large ones, sort of started out as these little entrepreneurial ventures. They would basically wait until the absolute last moment to go hire someone because that was money that they had to put out the door. So they would basically be like, okay, you're hired. We need you. We need a body here. Come on in. So there, the concept of a training program was sort of unheard of. And quite honestly, the real estate major was still amorphous. When I went to NYU, I went to Stern School of Business. And again, because I'd sort of done a master's, I had done all these, classes, the accounting classes, the marketing classes, and so forth. So I actually kind of customized my experience at NYU to take a number of classes from the School of Continuing Education, which is where you had the real estate classes. So I sort of say that I have a master's and an MBA in sort of finance management and real estate, whereas I kind of really made up the real estate part and just took a whole bunch of classes at the School of Continuing Education. They now have, the Schack Institute, and it's, a very formalized program. But back then you kind of had to figure your way out to try to get what you wanted out of that, out of that education and out of the experience.
And it's interesting to watch the real estate world become so institutionalized and more formal when we kind of all grew up in a different time. So tell us, so you started, I'm going to fast forward because maybe we'll go back after that. I want to hear about your not so newish company, Brook Farm Group. Tell us.
So, at one point I had the opportunity to sort of work with, one of my college buddies from Colgate, Eric Hade, who I mentioned before. He and I worked together at Waypoint Residential. He as the chief investment officer and myself as the chief operating officer. And we sort of realized that we were not only really good friends, but, really complementary in terms of our skill set. Eric was sort of involved in site selection, acquisition of deals, the development of deals, design, all that sort of stuff, all the way through kind of construction completion. And I had been spending a lot of my time at that point with corporate operations, but also with property operations. So where Eric sort of left off, I took over. And we worked together for, a few years at Waypoint. During COVID, Eric kind of approached me and sort of said, wouldn't this be kind of an interesting opportunity for us to do ourselves? We were hoping that sort of COVID was going to be short-lived and that, the real estate market was going to sort of boom after that. So we thought, hey, this is a pretty good time to start up a multifamily development company. So we kind of put together our business plan, sent it out to a number of folks, including, sort of a dear friend who ultimately said, hey, not only do I want to invest, but I want to be a partner. Chris Bogey, who's another Colgate guy, and a dear friend, kind of joined us as one of the partners of the company. We went to another, very close friend who had been investing in multifamily, and he said, I love the idea. I want to be your partner, and provided us with operating capital, a GP facility to do pre-development and to do GP investment, guarantee facility, line of credit to take down land. So Brook Farm Group was born sort of at the end of 2021.
What is it?
And I would say we had, so it was sort of decided by Eric and my kids. Eric kind of grew up in a town called Broadbrook. I live on a street called Brook Farm. Interestingly, Eric's son was the one who came up with Brook Farm Group. My kids were like, "Oh, Dad, that seems like they're taking it from you." But sure enough, everyone sort of seemed to agree that was kind of a cool name. And the acronym is BFG, which we sometimes affectionately refer to as big fat guys. So that's something
I was thinking
that
big,
sort of works
big
out.
F something else, though. That's all right.
Yeah. So,
I mean,
we go with big fat guys.
It's not a rock and a color, so I'm happy. It's great.
Yeah, exactly. We sort of made that that statement. We were like, we're not going to be a rock. We're not going to be a color. We're going to, we're going to go somewhere else. But, Brook is sort of in a bunch of different things too. So we kind of cheated a bit. Yeah. There's some Brooks out there.
And so it's focused on multi?
So to focus on multi, we do multifamily development in the Southeast markets. We'll also do some in the mountain states. We'll typically do that in sort of a co-development structure where we'll work with a developer who either doesn't have the financial strength or the operating acumen to get a deal done. So they'll bring us in and we'll kind of co-develop that deal with them. Our original business plan was to sort of do both acquisitions and development. We sort of defaulted to development, simply because as a new company and at the time, acquisition was, sort of hot. And we thought that, our only opportunity was actually to win something, especially given that we tend to syndicate our equity through high net worth channels, was, it was going to be pretty tough for us to actually sort of make our way into that world. So we picked development. I think that in my entire history, I couldn't have picked a worse time to become a real estate developer. I think I had 5 months of glory, as we started the company, and then the world sort of went, to hell in a handbasket. But that being said, we've actually had, some real success. We just completed our first project. It's a 388 unit project in Covington, Georgia, which is very close to where Rivian, the EV, car manufacturer, is building their second plant. So we're really excited about that. Lease up is going great. We've got a great team out there, and the project, I know no one ever calls their baby ugly, but my baby is absolutely beautiful. It's probably one of the nicest projects that I've ever been fortunate enough to work on in my career in the multifamily sort of space. Our second deal is a deal in Fort Myers. We'll be delivering units there in probably October of this year, 265 unit deal. So we were able to get those 2 deals off the ground during some pretty challenging times. We got Covington done in 2023, Fort Myers in 2024. And we've got 3 deals that we are looking to close on by the end of this year. So we're very excited about it. Everyone was sort of, surviving to 25. Now we're surviving through 25, and hopefully 26. We can come up with a fun acronym that makes that, the year to really kind of come back into the world.
These are all ground up development?
Yep, all ground up, and they're typically suburban product, 3 to 4 story wood frame or block and plank surface park deals. What we were trying to do is we were trying to hit, kind of the high end of the renter by necessity, the low end of the renter by choice. So we thought that was a pretty sweet spot in terms of where there was a need in the market, especially in some of these, tremendously growing markets that, that sort of renter by necessity has grown just with interest rates and with, the challenges of trying to be a homeowner. So we still think that we're, very well positioned, and look, I think as the tremendous amount of supply that kind of came into the market, kind of 24, a little bit into 25, the end of 23, as that is getting absorbed, there are so few deals that are actually getting started that when these deals come into the market, they're going to have very little competition. I think that they will have, tremendous interest, when we get to a point of, either refinancing or selling them. So we think that, our survival skills were good. And, we look forward to a time when, multi isn't so challenging to get done. But the deals that we get done, we're pretty excited about because we think that those will outperform as deals, kind of in 2010 and 11 outperformed, after the global financial crisis.
Right. And I imagine there's not as much brand new supply just because it's so hard to get things done these days.
Yeah, exactly. So our Covington deal actually came in, meaningfully under budget, more so than I've ever had in any of the deals that I've ever worked on in 25 plus years. And I think part of that is that so many of these general contractors and the subcontractors have been staffing up to handle the volume of work that was kind of coming through in, sort of 21, 22, 23. And with, that supply, that those new starts dwindling, I've got 3 crews on my team as opposed to barely being able to have 1. So they get through the things quicker. They've been aggressive on pricing, which has been great. And time is great for real estate deals. If you can get done quicker, you can save a little bit of money along the way. And we've seen that on both of our transactions in Covington, Georgia, and in Fort Myers.
What was the big difference? Like you're at AIG, you're at CBRE, investors. Waypoint is kind of entrepreneurial, but these are behemoth institutional investment firms, and now you're running a non-institutional investment firm doing your like what's the biggest difference? Like, is it like, do you love it? Kind of.
Yeah. No, I mean, really was sort of, the first part of my career, whether it be sort of Arthur Andersen, CBRE Global Investors, or AIG Global Real Estate. These are big behemoths, right? Big, huge organizations. And, an organization is nothing but a, big pool of people, but there were a lot of them. And, there were some wonderful things about that. Those large institutions are great. They focus on sort of training and development. They focus on, all the right things, but they are, they're battleships that take a lot of time to sort of move and maneuver. And in many ways, it's hard to sort of like capture, the opportunity of the moment, because you have to go through this committee and that committee and all that sort of stuff. After my CBRE days, and sort of commuting back and forth from New York to California every week, I sort of, took a step back and sort of said, wouldn't it be nice to do something that's a little bit more entrepreneurial? The opportunity with Waypoint came along, primarily because my now partner, Eric Hade, was there at the time and said, you'd be perfect for this opportunity. Let's get you in front of, the team. And it was so different. Those big, huge companies, they certainly have their challenges, but, they're pretty well established. They've got, the technology in place to sort of do what they need to do for the most part. Sometimes they don't. These smaller entrepreneurial ones, you sort of are holding them together sometimes with bubblegum and duct tape. And so it was a really interesting sort of change of mindset. That being said, they move quickly. So, if you sit down and say, well, we need to do this, well, you go and do it, as opposed to setting up a committee and talking about it for 6 months and then sort of, trying to figure out if you can do it or not. And then the world's changed and you have to do something else. I love this company. As challenging as sort of the last 4 years have been, it has been an absolute pleasure. We have a wonderful group of professionals that, we call BFG. It's 10 people, 5 people sort of up in the Bedford Hills office in Westchester County, and then 4 people down in our Atlanta office. Our development team is sort of, stationed down in Atlanta. We have one gentleman who works out of Jacksonville, and then we have sort of our operations team up in Bedford Hills. But it's been absolutely great. We were able to pull from our prior work experiences, and we actually have 2 professionals that came over from Waypoint to join us. My head of capital markets, as I mentioned, is a partner and a dear friend from 20 years. Is another Colgate, knucklehead, who runs our capital markets. Our investment associate is, a longtime friend of ours and a friend of the family and a friend of sort of our investors. We only went out for a couple of folks really to the market because we had sort of the team already in place. So for a company that's 4 years old, it feels and operates a lot more like a company that's been together for, a decade or more.
So if you were just starting out, whether it be that in school or, young in your career, and you really want to be an entrepreneur, is there any advice that you could give to people that kind of want to grow up and be you?
I hope no one wants to be me. It's a terrible
get out of
tragedy to
here.
be.
No, everyone wants to be you.
Look, I actually just had a conversation with a gentleman who's sort of looking to sort of go from sort of that corporate environment to a more entrepreneurial environment. What I would say is, you almost have to plan out your career a little bit. And this is, again, coming from someone who has been very, very institutional for his, life. But I sort of focus on my career as I wanted my 20s to be where I was learning as much as I possibly could. So whether that be at the job or whether it be in education, I spent my 20s really trying to sort of learn something, really, really learn it well. My 30s, I wanted to sort of focus and sort of really get into what I wanted to be my career for the rest of my life. And then, my 40s and 50s have been really trying to help build organizations and create value, through the experience that I've had. So I would say to people who are, who have that entrepreneurial bent, one, give the institutional world a try, because you're going to learn, and you're going to learn off of someone else's dime. And these organizations now have, phenomenal training programs. They have tremendous opportunity. You're getting a chance to look and see at so many different deals and so many different structures that it really helps you learn, while being valuable to that organization. My second piece of advice is don't wait too long, right? I was kind of an old fart when I decided to kind of go off and do this on my own, which I had done it 10 years earlier. It would have been great to sort of, have been doing this thing for, 10, 15 years at this point, and sort of really seeing what we could have done and where we could have gone with it. But I don't regret it one bit. And, you're sort of never ready to actually take that leap. There's always something that, well, you need to do at this company or you need to do in your personal life that will hold off, from doing all these different things. Don't wait. If you feel that you're ready for it and if you feel that you've got the experience and you have a passion for something, jump on it.
I know I wasn't asked this question, but I also would like to add, for me at least, it's like having a good partners too. Like you have your partner, like it's like one thing to do it like totally on your own, but then to have like partners like Lisa or the partners I have, it makes it less scary to do, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think that it's always, for me personally, it's been wonderful sort of being in partnership with one of my closest friends, and someone who I admire very much as, sort of an intelligent, experienced professional. I joke often that, half of our conversations are strategic in nature and half of them are therapeutic when I'm like, Eric, this happened, what's going on? He sort of talks me off the cliff, and I hope that I provide the same sort of comfort for him on certain things. But having somebody that you can kind of, that you really can trust and can really rely on, that's super important. And it, for me, it was the sort of special ingredient that sort of allowed me to sort of take that leap of faith. And I'm glad I did. I think it would have been very hard to sort of just go out there and do it on your own. Certainly not impossible, but, having someone there who can sort of help and, bounce ideas off of, it's a pretty special sort of, thing to have.
Right. That kind of relationship is so important. If you feel like you can trust someone 100%, you can really run a business while also having the ability to kind of step back if you need to. Or, it's like I always say, like, my husband and I have been married for almost 25 years. And I feel like the secret is that we support each other more than we support ourselves. And I feel like a good partnership, like Chris and I do that. It's important because if you don't, it's not built on that kind of trust and strength.
Another
Yeah,
funny thing I think about is like, I'm a parent now, and like when I was a kid, like I thought adults knew what they were doing, right? Like, well, they're in charge. This is all good. We're safe, like whatever. And then you become an adult, and it's like, wait a minute, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I don't know how to do this. And then like it's kind of like with business. It's like when I started out at a bigger organization, I'm like, oh yeah, they know what they're doing at the top. And then you work there a while, you work your way up, and you start sitting in those meetings, and you're like, wait a minute, they have no. They're just guessing as best as we are. You know what I mean? I'm like, I know I could do this.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how that's kind of how it started.
Right. It's like
I remember when I was
curtain.
I remember when I was given the opportunity at CBRE. I think I was 35 at the time to sort of be their global chief operating officer. And there was a part of me that was so excited about it. And it was this great company. And, it had sort of this international presence. And at the time was one of the top 2 or 3 largest real estate investment managers in the world. And I got there and I'm like, oh, wait. They actually want me to be a senior leader in this organization. I don't know what I'm doing. What's going on here? And you have to sort of have that moment where you're like, no, I got this. I can figure this out. I'm not going to know everything, but I'm going to be able to figure it out. And it's that moment when you're kind of like, okay, let's get this thing done and let's get it moving.
Right. As a dad, it's like, oh, who's going to take the garbage out? I'm like, wait a minute. No, my dad's not here. He's not taking it out. Like I have to take it. Who's going to clean up this place? I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Like I'm cleaning up this place. So what's next in your trajectory of the firm? Like, where are you just happy kind of just putting these deals out? It sounds like you guys are just getting cooking here.
Yeah. So, I think, look, with the market the way it's been, we've obviously done less, from our original business plan that we wanted to do sort of on an annual basis. But I think our first goal really is to get to sort of that steady state. We don't want to be a huge organization. We want to, take time, care, for each of the investments that we do. So, I'd be very happy doing, 4, 5, 6 deals a year. That would make me, super happy. I think we've got the team that can handle that. It allows us to really focus and to make sure that we are doing the best for our investors. From a capital raising perspective, capital raising is one of the most challenging things that you can do in any business, this business or any business. I think we'll probably, off of the success that we've had on our first couple deals and try to do something that's more kind of raising almost like an annual fund, trying to have the capital necessary to sort of do that year's volume of business. And with that, that'll allow us to potentially do some interesting acquisitions. We actually just put a deal under contract that is half acquisition and half development. So it's an existing 100 units of apartment stock that's stabilized, and then we have the ability to build, call it another 90 units right next door. I'd love to look at opportunities like that. But, obviously to be competitive in that, you want to make sure you have that capital readily available to be attracted to the brokerage, community and for, people who are selling. So we'd love to, make sure that we are thinking thoughtfully about how to raise that capital, have it, available for us in a timely manner, and then sort of see where the market takes us. But I'd love to be a nice, reasonable sized developer with a reasonable sized team that can, execute, a couple deals if that's what comes across our plate, or 6 or 7 deals.
It's interesting when you talk about the concept of fundraising, because I feel like in this market, we are seeing so many companies trying to hire someone who is a professional capital raiser, as opposed to being able to kind of integrate it into the leadership in a balanced way. And I think, part of that is it just seems like it's so hard to get capital, like the relationship lending, things are just harder now.
Yeah. When I was at CB, a lot of my job ended up being, business development. We had at the time, after we got through sort of the global financial crisis and started to play offense a little bit, we ended up acquiring the Asia, Europe investment management business for ING, as well as sort of their securities business. And, my job was to basically, port a lot of that capital that the ING teams were bringing to bear into the United States into our separate account business. And it's a challenge, right? These large institutions, there are 7 of me out in the waiting room, sort of, telling them that their next great idea, and that's in the Middle East, that's in Asia, that's in Europe, it's sort of everywhere. And when I went to Waypoint was, primarily focused on individual investing, and sort of going out and, raising money through, high net worth channels. Well, that's challenging in and of itself, right? You're not having to have one person write a big honking check. You're having 50 or 100 people write, decent sized checks, but, enough to sort of get that deal done and the next deal done and the next deal done after that. And so there's no easy way to do it. You have to be persistent, and you have to, really, realize that people have a lot of options out there. I try not to be terribly salesy when I go out. I just sort of, tell them the facts and tell them what I think. And, sometimes when I tell them is, hey, this is a deal. If you're thinking about this isn't probably the right deal for you. We'll come back to you on the next one. But, this is probably, not the right fit given sort of what you just told. I always find that, you have to just sit there and listen to people a little bit first and sort of understand kind of what they're thinking and what their interests are before you sort of like roll into your spiel, because sometimes it's just not appropriate.
It's helpful to people, I think, for you to give them both sides of it. So I often find when we're getting close to the end of a search, we'll have a conversation with someone around, well, have you considered this? Maybe you shouldn't take it because of this, because you can't hide those things from people, right? So at the end of the day, you better just getting in front of it. Here's what the deal is. Here's what the deal isn't. Here's where the risk is. And I think your investors, I'm sure, are very thankful for that.
At the end of the day, you are certainly selling a product or an opportunity or a deal or something like that, but you're really selling yourself. And I think that if you are true to yourself and true to kind of how you approach things, that's really important. And I think I would much rather have someone say, hey, thanks, no thanks on this deal, than sort of try to spin it in a way that gets the deal done, but probably isn't the result that they should be getting to. I just don't think that's we all have our names and our reputations, and, that's as critical as it can be. And that's what you take with you everywhere you go.
Yeah. As an investor in deals myself, it's, as a recruiter, like people hire, we have a nice platform, we have the marketing, but really people hire us because of Lisa or me or whoever, it's like relationship based. And then the same thing when I invest with guys, like the deal, okay, you're not going to show me you're not going to show me a deal that doesn't look good on paper, right?
Right.
It's a matter of do I trust you with my money type of thing. And
exactly.
As someone that's had good experiences with that and bad experience, and you can't really tell until shit hits the fan. And then all of a sudden, how do people react when shit hits the fan?
Yeah. Yeah. Look in the case of sort of development, right? Everything on paper is just that. It's on paper, right? You are making projections about what's going to happen in, 6 months when you actually get the deal signed up or the, construction loan signed up or whatever. And then 2 years hence when you actually start leasing the thing. So, all of it is, a whole bunch of assumptions and projections, and, making sure people understand that is important. Making sure that, you can tell them the good and the bad is important. And, look, that level of risk for some people just doesn't work. And, some people are very excited about a location. Some people are very excited about, sort of the story, but some people have lots of reasonable, relevant questions. And I think you have to answer them honestly and sincerely, like, it was your money that you were putting into it. Cause, effectively I am putting my money into these things. And, I'd want to know what I know, as much as the next person. And I want to make sure that I'm giving them the benefit of all the stuff that I've looked at in order to kind of, make the decision that, hey, yes, this is something that's right for me and right for our company.
Do you see AI or technology changing any of the things that you're doing now, or like kind of have a forward thinking that I'm going to work for a robot someday or something?
Yeah, it's crazy. And AI is amazing, and I'm just sort of starting to sort of dip my toe into that water. I remember having a conversation with a sort of a dear friend of mine, who's also sort of in the multifamily development business, and he has basically just fully onboarded, AI. He's using AI to sort of, summarize his, his construction loan documents, his lease agreements, this, that, and the other, and seeing the power of what that's capable of doing. And at these early stages, right? I mean, I think, you can find that AI can do a lot of stuff, but, maybe it gets it 80% right or 70% right or something like that. It's only going to get better. So I think it's going to be a quantum shift, in how companies do their everyday things, right? There are a lot of, repeatable procedures that can be done very, very effectively with AI. The question is, and, I have a son who's just sort of made his way into the real estate business. A lot of what he does, I'm sure one day be sort of replaced by AI, right? That being said, so you don't need that position, but you still do, because that entry level position will eventually become the associate, the vice president, the director, the managing director. You've got to have that training mechanism. So I think those positions are going to change. And I'm sure that jobs will be taken by AI, but you also have to figure out how to sort of introduce people into the company to work alongside AI so that they have the experience necessary to sort of take some of these more strategic type, opportunities within an organization to make sure that they're going in the right direction and that we're pivoting and doing whatever we need to do. So I think it's fascinating. I think everyone should be thinking about it and looking at it. And I do think that it is going to change the landscape considerably, and not in the too distant future.
Well, yeah, it's happening. Hopefully it doesn't cause less jobs, just different jobs. Right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of
exactly.
the transition of every technology. Peter, I'm trying to do this very funny intro here, Peter, but it's not working.
Well, you see all the gray hairs on my head from all the.
If you think raising capital is stressful, welcome to the hot seat.
I think Peter's got this. I'm confident you'll be able to answer every question with ease.
All right. All right. We're ready.
Let's start. We'll dig in. Do you have any books or podcasts that you'd recommend? Things you've...
Yeah. So I mean, I was going to tell you that my favorite podcast was the Impact Real Estate podcast with Chris Papa and Lisa Flicker. But of course, I think I have to say now that it is the Beyond the
we
Resume
changed
podcast.
it. We changed it for you.
It's hard to keep up with you guys. It's terrible.
I know.
Look, I think it's great. I actually love the human element you guys bring. You brought so many of my dear friends in. You just had Sherry Thompson, and you've had Brendan Selvoff, you had Gunnar Branson, Depp Smith, James Nelson, a good Colgate boy. And so it's great actually listening to their stories and sort of picking up a little tidbit here and there. I love CBRE's the Weekly Take. I think it covers so much of what's going on in the real estate industry, and Spencer Levy is one of my dear friends, and I think one of the most dynamic speakers in the industry. I love Willie Walker's Walker Webcast, especially when he gets Peter Linneman on there. Peter always makes me feel good, even if the world just like blew up. Peter's got a sort of a positive take on it. So those have been great. I've really sort of started getting into podcasts probably within the last year, and really, really enjoy it. It's a great way to sort of get information and data. So I think they're great.
Yeah.
My favorite books, I have 3 books that I would recommend to anyone, and I think that they have been very influential in sort of shaping my career. The first one would be A Good to Great by Jim Collins. Love that.
Yeah.
Next would be Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. And Daniel Goleman's sort of the father of EQ. And it really tells you sort of how EQ is so important in sort of our daily jobs and lives and careers. The third is Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher. And, whether you're sort of in a position where you do negotiations or not, what Fisher does in that book is really tell you sort of like, the importance of sort of walking a mile in someone else's shoes. And I think that is so critical, kind of in your everyday life, right? If you can understand sort of what your counterparty or the person you're talking to or whatever is going through or what they need, you can figure out something that sort of works for you, works for them, and you end up with a better, a better result, whether that be through a negotiation or just through sort of an interaction.
Another good negotiating one is never split the difference.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, and oh, well, you're at 5, I'm at 7. Let's split it at 6. Well, no, there's a reason I'm at 5, and I need you to understand it. How about we're at 5 and we do something else, or how about something that's really important to you, but we stay at the really important to me. So
I got to
there are
read
always
that one
ways.
because
to
I
do that.
loved it, but nothing sticks with me. I still split it.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm sort of like
Always
I
split the
have to
difference
read
with
these
your
things
follow.
like 2 or 3 times every like I have to come back to them every year, every other year, and just be like, oh yeah, I remember what they said.
I remember years ago reading the book Never Eat Alone, and it was a book I really enjoyed. And recently, one of my children was like, "Mom, I found this book. I feel like you wrote it. It would be so good for you." I'm like, those kind of books. I feel like they kind of get into who you are and they help you to develop your whole professional persona. So I think
Yeah,
they're great.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
You've done a lot of deals in your day. What has been your most memorable deal?
Oh my goodness. I would tell you sort of my most memorable deal is probably the deal that I didn't do. I remember early in my sort of AIG career, I was sort of overseeing sort of residential investment on the East Coast. And we were looking at a deal in Panama City, Florida. And it was sort of right around the time when the world was super, super hot and sort of condos were the fad. And we were working on a deal that was interesting. It was like an old nightclub that basically went that was going to be acquired and then sort of built into sort of this big huge sort of condo development. I remember going out there and literally it was 11 o'clock in the morning when we were touring the facility, and like people were still passed out on like couches and stuff like that. I was like, oh, pretty interesting place. But I remember kind of like doing my due diligence in the market, and I remember going to one of our competing properties that was sort of doing their sort of pre-sales. And I remember, sitting there waiting to sort of, talk to one of the sales agents, and this gentleman walked in, and I would have told you that, he probably, couldn't buy gas, never mind, a sales, condo. And he sort of met up with his, sales agent, and he was like, so and so, I was able to scrounge up another, $3,000. So, put me down for another, for another unit. And I'm thinking to myself, if this thing is, 50% sold out and half of them are sold out to the guys who will never be able to execute in the event of a downturn, that would be a really bad day. And guess what?
Right.
It was a really, really bad day. We ended up not doing that deal. And I had to very, very adamantly sort of, maintain my position because the team wanted to do it, right? Leadership wanted to do it. It was with a great partner. It was going to be a, sort of a great long-term relationship. And I really had to sort of push why this was a deal that we shouldn't do. I am forever grateful that we didn't do it because it would have been terrible. Just a wrong time, a bad result. So I'm always sort of thankful. And I sort of tell people that sometimes your best deal is a deal that, you're able to get out of whole. Sometimes it's the deal that you didn't do. Some of the deals that I did that were amazing deals, it was sort of easy. You sort of found a great location, you built a product, the market was strong, you did better, on lease up and on rents, and you sold it for more than you thought. But, was that really you, or was that just a great market? Those are great to have, right? They're wonderful. But sometimes, your real metal comes in when you have to make that tough decision and say, not this one, or hey, we've got to do this, recognizing that we're kind of going to be leaving some money on the table, but we have to sort of do this to make sure that we're okay.
It's always better to be
Good
lucky
story.
than good.
Good story.
Yeah, love it.
I'm
So
old. I've got a lot of good stories.
I know we could talk for hours. We're gonna have to do a part 2, even though it took us a year to get this one scheduled.
Exactly. We'll set it for 2028.
That's right. That's right. Maybe the market will be different.
Great
by
and
then.
8.
Great and
That's
8.
right.
All
I love
right.
it. I love it. You got to patent that.
That's
Okay.
it.
Let's do
It's
it.
the name of this episode. I love it. So obviously you've done a lot of hiring, and it sounds like you have a small, lean team now. What do you look for when you hire folks?
Yeah. So in my jobs, I've probably had the good fortune of hiring 200 people, both in the United States and abroad. What I would say is that typically when someone gets to me, they've already been vetted as someone who's intelligent, someone who sort of knows sort of their trade. What I look for, and I think what is most important to me, is really the focus of character and cultural fit. You cannot teach character. Character is what it is. It's sometimes a little hard to pull that out, over the course of a half an hour or an hour interview. I've got some super secret special questions that I try to ask to sort of, gauge character, but it's really important. And then obviously cultural fit. You could have the most wonderful employee, but if it's not a cultural fit, it's not going to work for the team. It's not going to work for the individual, and it's going to be relatively short-lived. If I can get a good sort of, guide on character and cultural fit, that's really what I sort of tend to focus on when making that decision.
Is there any, like, how do you vet that? Do you have any specific questions that you ask?
I do, but they're super secret.
Oh,
I can't divulge them to the millions of viewers.
Somehow I didn't hear it.
Then everyone's going to be, ace my my hard questions.
So Chris is like, like the reporter who tries to get everyone to tell, like, he's like, all right, let's see if we could break these secret questions.
I had a woman on who, I've used this before, and it really stumps people. Like during an interview, I was like, just tell me a joke. And it really,
I love that, right?
Because you never think of a joke on your, like, when you need to. At least I can.
Yep.
Right.
No, it's questions like that where you're sort of putting them a little bit off guard, and you get to see a little bit into, I always say, you should be able to sort of handle yourself and sort of be, somewhat professional in a half an hour interview. If you can't, then, God bless you. But, but the trying to get them a little bit sort of uncomfortable, a little bit off their standard, really helps you see sort of through that and into the actual person.
Yeah, me too. Because I'm sure you've had some mentors in your day. I mean, we don't do any of this alone. You mentioned your partner now is like, we need help, right? And so who has kind of guided you along, or people that you have stepped up and like you've looked up to or helped you along the way?
And I've had so many great people who have helped me sort of in my career. So my real estate career really started with AIG. And, as I was sort of like growing in my career, AIG was growing as sort of an investment manager. So, in AIG, I had so many people who I reported to, who were, sort of colleagues, who, were people who reported to me, that sort of brought me along. I mean, I can think of Don Huffner, Gary Kleinman, Peter Seeley, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Joel Hammer, Norm Miller inside the organization. AIG was also sort of at the forefront at the time when I joined them of getting back into sort of multifamily development. So we were one of the few people that had, sort of dollars. So needless to say, we got, some really great development partners. And so many of these wonderful people sort of took me under their wing and sort of helped me understand the business. Folks like Dean Henry, the late Dean Henry, God rest his soul, Guy Hayes from Legacy Partners. I worked with Blake Pogue and Jason Reynolds at Phoenix Property Company, Jeff Courtwright at Lincoln Property Company, Michael Melaw, who was a wonderful, wonderful mentor of mine from Trammell Residential and then Mill Creek. And, I've been so fortunate. I interviewed at one point for a job with Russ Appel and didn't get the job, but Russ became like, he just became my buddy and like would call me and check in on me and ask me, questions about stuff. And we ended up having this wonderful relationship, even though I didn't get the job. So that's been, I've been absolutely fortunate, all throughout my career with some wonderful people. I've also had great education with people who have taught me how not to do something. You can learn from anybody, right? And so I've had situations where someone has done something or had acted in a certain way. And I said, that's not how I want to be as a professional or as a leader. And so that education is almost, as important as the people who sort of, take you under their wing and guide you along. I'd say probably the most important person that I've had in my life is my dad. My dad was an immigrant from Italy, came over when he was 18 years old, actually went to Argentina and built homes, and then came up to the United States and had the equivalent of an 8th grade education. But my father was the hardest working guy I've ever met. Into his late 60s, he would still put in 75-hour work week. And, he sort of said to me, recognizing, my limited intellectual ability, he was like, look, you're never going to be the smartest guy in the room, right? But you can be the hardest working. And I think that has been something that I have carried through in my entire career. Raise your hand for everything, right? Make sure that you are, present and that you're focused on the job and that you are doing everything you can to sort of help the organization because the organization is going to help you. And I've hoped that I've, carried that forward to my sons, and sort of carried that sort of DeCorpo tradition on along.
Well, you didn't get the job with Russ Appel at Pradium, but you got the job as a great podcast guest. So thank you for coming on here.
Thank you so much.
I've had a lot of great experience looking at all these fantastic people before me. So I was well prepared.
Oh, thanks, man.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Resume, a Jackson Lucas podcast where we take a deep dive into the career journeys of some of the top minds in real estate and equip you with the knowledge to move forward in your path towards the success you've envisioned. Make sure to like, Share and subscribe to Beyond the Resume. We're grateful for your support. All episodes of Beyond the Resume are brought to you by Jackson Lucas, building inclusive and diverse businesses through talent acquisition. Visit us at jacksonlucas.com.